The world is silent now, and you are safe. But deep within the quiet cathedral of your own cells lies a library of genetic history, meticulously cataloguing every plague, famine, and terror your ancestors survived. Tonight, we gently open that book to read the inherited trauma and biological flaws that are, quite literally, written into the very code of being human. It is the story of survival, written in code, and it never truly ends. Our story is about the dark side of human evolution. We're going to look closely at the mistakes, the broken pieces, and the strange gifts our bodies inherited from millions of years of struggle. These are the vestigial flaws and hidden dangers that prove we're constantly haunted by the compromises our deep ancestors had to make just to stay alive. We will explore the factual, biological time capsules that make us fragile, yet also incredibly enduring. The placenta is a virus. Imagine your body as a historic house, and the basement is full of old forgotten blueprints. One of the strangest things we found on those blueprints is a code that once belonged to a virus, a retrovirus. This virus invaded our ancestors millions of years ago, but instead of killing them, it settled in. The scariest part is that this invader didn't leave. It became a part of us, writing its own dark story directly into the family history book that is our DNA. The virus's stolen code now builds the protein we call syncytin 1. This is the material that forms the barrier between a pregnant mother and her baby, the placenta. Without this ancient viral component, human pregnancy as we know it would simply not be possible. A terrifying, long-dead enemy is now the very thing that shelters new life. It's a perfect example of a genetic parasite being turned into an essential function. So every single human being alive today carries the mark of this viral infection, a permanent and useful scar in our genetic blueprint. Next time you think of life as pure and untouched, remember that a piece of you, the part that gives and sustains life, is literally a viral zombie code, resurrected by evolution to serve a new purpose. Our very beginning is built on a microscopic horror story, the autoimmune saboteur. Another ghostly virus hidden in our DNA plays a different, more damaging game. These human endogenous retroviruses, or HERVs, make up about 8% of your entire genetic code. They are silent most of the time, just dusty books on the shelf, but sometimes they wake up. When a HERV activates, it can trigger an alarm, confusing your body's own immune system into thinking you're under attack from a foreign enemy that isn't really there. This mistaken identity crisis is believed by many scientists to be a trigger for autoimmune disorders, such as multiple sclerosis. The immune system is a powerful army, and when it's tricked by an ancient integrated foe, it starts firing at your own healthy cells, believing they are the enemy. The war takes place inside your body, all because of an infection that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago. The battle is not fresh. It is an echo of ancient biological warfare that we carry within us. We're all walking bundles of viral luggage, and sometimes that baggage is heavy. This dormant viral code is a reminder that in the long, messy process of evolution, nothing is truly discarded. Everything that has ever entered us has a small chance of being saved and reused, even if that reuse leads to chaos and chronic pain today. The jumper genes. Even without full viruses, parts of our code act like genetic fleas, leaping from one place on the DNA strand to another. These are called transposons, or jumping genes. These tiny code snippets constantly copy and paste themselves throughout our genome, and this activity can be dangerous, like a mischievous child scribbling in a highly important instruction manual. If a jumping gene lands exactly in the middle of a crucial functional gene, it can permanently break that instruction, often leading to serious conditions like haemophilia or muscular dystrophy. This is random genetic sabotage happening without any warning. It is the purest form of hereditary horror, a tiny piece of rogue code creating devastating consequences out of sheer silent chance. The activity of these jumping genes is mostly controlled and quiet, but they are always there, waiting for a chance to move. They represent the instability of our own biological system. We rely on the absolute precision of our genetic code, yet a small, ancient army of internal saboteurs constantly tests that stability, reminding us that the perfect, clean blueprint we imagine is actually filled with restless, ticking time bombs. There are specific, ancient gene segments that can increase our susceptibility to psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia. These genes are thought to be evolutionary trade-offs. Perhaps they once provided some advantage, like increased creativity or vigilance against danger, when our ancestors lived in harsh, stressful environments. But in the structured modern world, these same genetic differences can lead to a destabilized perception of reality, a world where the quiet hum of existence is replaced by noise. The horror lies in the biological memory of stress. Our ancestors who were more alert, perhaps even overly sensitive to threats, were the ones who survived in certain harsh periods. But their hypervigilance coded into their DNA became a dangerous flaw for their descendants. It is the past environment still speaking to the present brain, often causing profound suffering, simply because a certain degree of madness was historically useful. This is not a character flaw, but a genetic inheritance, a tragic design choice made millions of years ago that continues to affect millions of lives today. It is the ghost of an ancient hunter, always listening for the predator that is no longer there and turning that fear inward. We are constantly reminded that our most important organ, the brain, is fundamentally a biological compromise, still programmed for a world that ceased to exist long ago. The missing sweetness gene. Humans, unlike most mammals, cannot naturally produce vitamin C inside their bodies. This is because the final gene needed for the process, called gulo, broke down and became permanently non-functional in our ancestors millions of years ago. Since we were eating so many fruits and vegetables full of vitamin C, the body decided this gene was unnecessary and let it decay, leaving us forever dependent on our diet for a vital nutrient. The horrifying consequence of this broken gene is the disease scurvy. For thousands of years, sailors and isolated populations suffered gruesome deaths because their diet lacked a simple vitamin their bodies should have been able to make. Scurvy is the cost of genetic redundancy, a penalty for evolution's decision to drop a necessary tool. It is a biological time bomb, easily triggered by a simple lack of fresh food. This missing enzyme is a clear, powerful reminder of where we came from. It shows that evolution is often lazy and short-sighted, only solving the immediate problem without considering the future. We're all just one long sea journey, or one great famine away from our ancestors' deadly vulnerability. The sweetness gene is gone, and the price we pay is a lifetime of dietary caution. The ghost of the tail. In the early stages of development, every human embryo briefly grows a small vestigial tail. This temporary structure, composed of several tiny vertebrae, is a direct, undeniable echo of the time when our distant mammal ancestors needed a tail for balance and movement. Though it usually retracts and merges to form the tailbone before birth, the code to grow a tail is still fully present in our DNA. Sometimes, however, the genetic command to stop growing the tail fails. In very rare, isolated cases, infants are born with a soft, fleshy, harmless tail. This extreme rarity proves that the ancient blueprint is not deleted, only silenced. The ghost of our tree-dwelling past remains ready to be awakened by a small genetic error, reminding us that we are only a few chromosomes away from our furry, swinging ancestors. The tailbone, or coccyx, is itself a relic, a useless structure that can cause crippling pain if it is injured. It is a biological liability, left over from a design that evolution abandoned. We carry the remnants of a once useful tool that now only serves as a site for injury, and a reminder that our upright posture is built on the folded-up skeleton of an animal that once walked on all fours. The appendix time bomb. The appendix is perhaps the most famous vestigial organ. a small worm-like tube attached to the large intestine. Many scientists believe it was once a large necessary chamber where plant-eating ancestors digested tough vegetation. But as our diet changed, the organ shrank and became useless, though it is not completely without function, containing some immune cells today. Its horror story comes from its current design. It is a perfect little dead-end trap. When food particles or waste get stuck in the tiny opening, it can become inflamed and rupture, causing the potentially lethal condition known as appendicitis. A simple, useless remnant of evolution is one of the most common reasons humans require emergency surgery and face a real threat of death. This ancient relic is a perfect example of poor biological engineering. It's a flaw that persists simply because the evolutionary pressure to remove it completely has never been strong enough to override the code. The appendix is a piece of unnecessary, dangerous hardware running in the operating system of the human body, waiting silently for the moment it will fail and turn on its host. The choking hazard. Our ability to speak complex language, a cornerstone of humanity, required a major and dangerous design change in our throat. The voice box, or larynx, had to drop lower in the throat than it is in most primates. This created a larger chamber for producing a wide range of sounds, but it introduced a lethal flaw. It is a clear case of trading physical safety for communication. The hazard is that the human windpipe and the food pipe cross paths in the throat, sharing a single junction point. This means that a small piece of food can easily slip into the airway, blocking our breath completely. It is a biological design failure. In a split second, the very mechanism we use to survive, eating, can become the source of sudden, silent death. This flaw is the ultimate evolutionary compromise. Every time we take a deep breath or swallow a bite of food, we are performing a tiny, risky biological juggling act. The price for being able to say, "I love you," or "I need help," is the constant underlying risk of choking. This is the genetic horror that reminds us that our most prized ability comes with a built-in, ancient death switch: the wobbly back. When our ancestors stood up on two legs, it was a defining moment for the species, but it was structurally disastrous. Our spine evolved to support a four-legged body, hanging horizontally like a bridge, but now it has to support a large, heavy torso vertically like a crane. To handle this, the spine developed unnatural curves, the S-curve, which are inherently unstable and prone to failure. The discs between the vertebrae, the soft, jelly-like shock absorbers, were not designed to withstand the constant vertical compression of standing all day. This poor design leads to an epidemic of slipped discs and chronic lower back pain, a condition that affects the vast majority of humans today. It is the inescapable cost of our bipedal triumph, a continuous aching payment for standing tall. We are fundamentally built on a faulty frame. Our backs are a historical monument to a species that stood up before its skeleton was ready. This chronic pain is the whisper of the jungle floor, where our ancestors were meant to roam on all fours. The wobbly back is one of the clearest pieces of evidence that evolution favours function over comfort, no matter how painful the long-term trade-off. The wisdom tooth war. Our jaws used to be much longer, easily accommodating a third set of large molars, the wisdom teeth, which were necessary for grinding down tough uncooked plants. But as our diet softened and our brains grew larger, our faces flattened and our jaws shrank. The genetic code for those teeth, however, did not get the memo to stop growing them. The result is a brutal internal war. By the time wisdom teeth try to erupt, there is often no space left in the smaller jaw. They become impacted, pushing against existing teeth, causing intense pain, infection, and often requiring surgical removal. It is a fight between the ancient design of the jaw and the modern reality of the skull, a painful conflict we are forced to resolve with a surgeon's tool. The need for wisdom tooth removal is a literal genetic tax on being human. Our DNA is still trying to grow the massive chewing apparatus of a cave-dwelling ancestor, while our modern skull demands a smaller, more refined structure. This dental horror story is a perfect example of two parts of the body evolving at different speeds, leaving us with a painful and expensive reminder of our primitive past. Hernia. The test of walking. When our ancestors stood upright, their abdominal organs suddenly had to contend with the full force of gravity pulling them down. Our ancestors never fully closed the openings in the lower abdomen that allowed for the development of sex organs. This weak point means that even today, simple actions like heavy lifting can cause internal organs to push through the abdominal wall, a condition known as a hernia. The body structure failed the gravity test. A hernia is a visible, sometimes painful tear in the body support structure, a direct consequence of a change in posture that happened millions of years ago. It's a design fault that simply wasn't corrected because the evolutionary pressure wasn't strong enough. We are literally held together by a biological seam that is too weak for our vertical lifestyle. This vulnerability is a stark reminder that evolution is not a clever engineer, but a hurried patcher. It found a solution for standing upright, but didn't bother to fully reinforce the new stress points. We carry this structural weakness in our core, a genetic ticket that could cash out for an emergency room visit just because we decided to walk on 2 feet. The fragile knee joint. The knee joint is a mechanical marvel, but it is also one of the most fragile points in the human body. Unlike four-legged animals, our knees bear the entire weight of our body in a highly unstable vertical line. The main ligaments, the ACL for example, are frequently torn by even simple twisting motions, a common injury that rarely affects animals walking on all fours. This lack of reinforcement is the result of rapid evolutionary change. Our ancestors changed their posture faster than the knee had time to redesign itself for a life of running and jumping in an upright position. The knee is a crucial hinge, yet it is held together by connections that are easily snapped. It is a structural nightmare that causes lifelong pain and limited movement for many. The knee is a biological weak spot, a point of constant potential failure. Every time we walk or run, we are testing the limits of this compromise. It is a reminder that the perfect balance of a gymnast is built on a rickety foundation, a piece of genetic engineering that is constantly demanding caution, lest we pay the heavy price for standing up too soon. The goosebump error. Goosebumps are a fascinating yet useless vestigial reflex. They are caused by tiny muscles called erector pili, attached to the base of every hair follicle, contracting to make the hair stand up. For our furry ancestors, this action created a thick layer of insulating air, helping them stay warm. It also made them look bigger and more threatening to rivals. For modern humans, who have very little body hair, this mechanism's completely pointless. When we get cold or feel intense emotion, our bodies still execute this ancient command, but the result is nothing more than a few bumps on the skin. It is the genetic equivalent of an old computer running a useless program that was forgotten years ago. The goosebump reflex is a reminder that our genetic code is filled with outdated software. It's a silent, tiny ritual that happens every time we feel a chill or hear a scary story, trying to make us look more fearsome or keep us warm, yet failing on both counts. We carry the memory of thick fur, and this ghostly memory can still trigger our skin. The eyeball's blind spot. The human eye is an incredible tool, but it is built backward. The light-sensitive cells, the rods and cones, are located behind the wiring and blood vessels that serve them, meaning the light has to pass through the wires before it hits the sensor. This flawed design requires a hole in the retina for the optic nerve to exit, creating a massive, permanent blind spot in the centre of our vision. The brain cleverly fills in this missing information, essentially guessing what should be there so we don't notice the gap. However, the blind spot is objectively real, a failure of engineering that no smart engineer would ever repeat. It is a persistent flaw that we must rely on our brain to hide, proving that even our primary sense is built on a dangerous lie. This backward eye is the genetic horror of not seeing the full truth. Our world is constantly being reconstructed by our brain to cover up an inherited design mistake. It is the price for the specific evolutionary path we took, a permanent reminder that even the clearest vision is based on a foundational, biological deception hidden right in front of us. The third eyelid relic. Look closely at the inner corner of your eye, next to your tear duct. You will see a small pink fold of tissue called the plica semilunaris. This tiny structure is the shrunken, useless remnant of a third eyelid, or nictitating membrane, that is still fully functional in many birds, reptiles, and sharks. They use it like a clear biological wiper to quickly clean and protect the eye. In humans, the third eyelid is nothing more than a historical marker. Over time, the necessary genes for a fully working membrane were switched off, leaving behind this small piece of redundant skin. It's a tiny, silent memorial to the time when our ancestors needed an extra layer of protection, perhaps from dust or while hunting in murky water. This is the genetic horror of having a spare part you can no longer use. It's a design element that evolution decided to abandon, but never fully remove from the blueprint. The plica semilunaris is a piece of code that should have been deleted but was simply deactivated, a small pink reminder of the time when the human body was built more like a fish or a lizard. The useless muscle in the wrist. About 14% of humans are missing a muscle in their forearm called the palmaris longus. This muscle runs from the elbow to the wrist, and was once crucial for gripping and climbing in tree-dwelling primates. You can easily check if you have it by touching your thumb and little finger together and flexing your wrist. If a tendon pops up, you have it. For those who still have it, the muscle is completely useless, and its tendon is often used by surgeons for grafts since removing it causes no loss of strength. Its uselessness is a clear sign that evolution is shedding parts of our past. The body is slowly deleting the tools necessary for a life spent swinging through trees because we no longer need them to survive. The absence or presence of this muscle is a quiet marker of how recently our lineage stopped relying on climbing. It is a genetic decision being made in real time, one family line at a time. The palmaris longus is a relic of the forest, a piece of genetic code that is slowly disappearing, showing us how our own body is actively forgetting its ancient jungle-dwelling past. The lonesome plantaris. Similar to the wrist muscle, the plantaris muscle, located in the calf, is also useless and absent in about 10% of people. This tiny muscle and its long, slender tendon was historically used by primates to grasp things with their feet, a trait we no longer use since we spend our time walking, not grabbing. This muscle is so insignificant today that it's often referred to as the freshman nerve by medical students, because it's a source of confusion. Like the palmaris longus, its tendon is often harvested during reconstructive surgery because it serves no function in modern life. It's a prime example of evolutionary debris, a scrap of code left over from a previous life. The body is discarding the tools of its past, one useless piece at a time. The plantaris is a quiet testament to the shift from the forest canopy to the open savanna. It's a tiny genetic horror story of abandonment, where an entire muscle is now a redundant ghost in our leg, slowly being written out of the human instruction manual over millennia. The sleepy body clock gene. Our natural body clock or circadian rhythm is genetically programmed to run slightly longer than 24 hours, closer to 24 hours and 15 minutes. This small, consistent drift means that if you lived in a cave without clocks or sunlight, your wake-up time would creep later each day. This is an inherited trait that makes it naturally harder for us to wake up early on a regular 24-hour cycle. The horror is that we are constantly fighting our own ancient internal clock. It is believed this slightly longer cycle was useful when our ancestors spent more time awake in the dark, perhaps for safety or hunting. But for modern humans living by a strict clock, This inherited genetic preference creates jet lag, sleep debt, and the constant nagging feeling of tiredness. This small genetic difference is a daily struggle for millions. It shows that our biology is simply incompatible with the rigid demands of the modern world. We are genetically programmed to be a little bit sleepy, a biological laziness passed down through the generations, making us constantly wish for just a few more minutes of rest. The hiccup reflex hiccups are a bizarre and useless reflex that seems to serve no purpose in adults. The process involves an involuntary spasm of the diaphragm and a sudden closing of the vocal cords. Scientists believe this ancient code is a remnant from much earlier, water-dwelling creatures like tadpoles, where a similar mechanism helps regulate water flow over their gills. In humans, the hiccup reflex is highly active in developing fetuses in the womb, which may help them practice the necessary muscles for breathing after birth. However, for an adult, a bout of hiccups is simply a useless, inconvenient spasm, an embarrassing biological glitch that we cannot control, often causing distress and mild panic until it finally stops. This is the genetic horror of being haunted by the life we left behind. Every hiccup is a tiny involuntary nod to the ancient fish and amphibians that are part of our deep family tree. The body's running an outdated aquatic program for no reason, proving that our DNA still holds the memory of living completely underwater millions of years ago. The silent eruption. In rare instances, humans are born with extra nipples, a condition known as supernumerary nipples, usually along the milk line that runs from the armpit to the inner thigh. This is a direct genetic memory of the time when our mammal ancestors needed multiple sets of mammary glands to feed large litters of young. For humans who typically bear 1 or 2 children at a time, these extra nipples are completely vestigial and serve no purpose. They are simply an extra piece of genetic code that failed to be edited out. The body is essentially printing a part of the old blueprint that should have been ignored, a physical mark of a much more fertile primitive past. This phenomenon is a silent physical reminder that our biology is designed for a much different reproductive strategy. We carry the potential for a large litter, a ghostly outline of a past fertility written into the skin. It is a harmless but profound genetic error, demonstrating the slow, often messy nature of evolution as it tries to forget its old needs. The pain threshold, one of the most profound genetic gifts, or curses, we receive from our Neanderthal cousins, is a gene that affects our perception of pain. Specifically, some people inherited a Neanderthal version of a gene called SCN9A, which is responsible for how quickly and intensely pain signals travel to the brain. Those who carry this specific version of the gene often report feeling pain more intensely than others. It is believed that for the Neanderthals, this heightened sensitivity was an advantage, a warning system that ensured they healed wounds quickly in a brutal environment. For modern humans, however, it can translate to chronic disabling pain sensitivity. This is a biological difference with deep time origins. Our closest relatives gave us a genetic trait designed for a tougher world, and we are still paying the price for their enhanced survival instinct. It is the genetic horror of having a body that is too sensitive, always listening too loudly to the quiet suffering of its own nervous system. The morning person. Trap. Some people are genetically predisposed to being morning people because of an ancient genetic variant inherited from Neanderthals. This variant affects the body's circadian rhythm, or sleep-wake cycle, programming the person to wake and sleep much earlier than the average human. This early bird tendency may have been a valuable survival strategy during the Ice Age. Waking before dawn meant that an ancient group could have some members up and alert for threats at different times, covering all the dark hours. It was a genetic insurance policy, ensuring the safety of the entire group in an extremely dangerous world. This is the genetic echo of a world where cold and danger dictated our sleep schedules. If you are an unwilling morning person, you're running an ancient code designed for a freezing cave, not a warm bed. It is a reminder that even our simplest daily ritual, waking up, is governed by a genetic difference passed down from a species long gone. The fat-hoarding gene Neanderthals lived in extremely cold climates, and their bodies were genetically programmed to be efficient fat storers. Modern humans inherited some of these genes, which are excellent at holding on to every spare calorie, making their bodies highly efficient at surviving famines and cold snaps. In the modern world, where food is abundant and cold is easily escaped with heating, this fat-hoarding gene becomes a liability, contributing to weight gain and conditions like type 2 diabetes. The biological strategy that saved our ancestors in a frozen landscape is now sabotaging our health in a comfortable one. This is the horror of abundance. Your body is still running the genetic program of an Ice Age survivalist, preparing for a famine that will never come. The Neanderthals' wisdom in the deep cold has become a modern health struggle, a persistent inherited hunger for calories written deep into the core of your metabolism. The hair and skin genes. Many modern humans inherited a suite of genes from Neanderthals that affect hair thickness, hair colour and skin pigmentation. These genes likely help them adapt quickly to the lower levels of sunlight and the intense cold of Europe and Asia after they left Africa. The result is a wide diversity in hair and skin types today. The scary part is the potential for overreaction. Some of these inherited genes can make the skin overly sensitive to sunlight, increasing the risk of sunburn and skin damage, a side effect of adapting quickly to the northern hemisphere. The protective mechanism of one era becomes a fragility in another. Your skin and hair are wearing the uniform of a different species. This is the genetic horror of climate change. Not the modern one, but the ancient deep change that forced your ancestors to mix their genes with another species just to survive the cold. Every freckle and hair curl is a biological passport stamped by a Neanderthal relative. The nicotine addiction trap. One genetic variant inherited from Neanderthals has been directly linked to an increased risk of nicotine addiction in modern humans. This gene affects the way the brain processes pleasure and reward, making carriers much more likely to seek out and become dependent on stimulating substances like nicotine. It's believed that the Neanderthal version of this gene may have served to promote exploratory behavior or intense focus, traits that would be beneficial in a hunter-gatherer society. But in the modern world of manufactured chemicals and addictive substances, this heightened reward system becomes a cruel trap, a compulsion written into the deepest part of the brain. This is the genetic horror of having a brain that is too eager for reward. The deep-seated ancestral drive for survival and exploration has been hijacked by a chemical. We are running a genetic program designed to seek resources, which now manifests as a destructive habit. The Neanderthal's hunger for survival has turned into a modern craving, the inflammatory overreaction. Many modern humans carry Neanderthal genes that turbocharge the immune system, making it more aggressive and quicker to react to foreign invaders. While this was brilliant for fighting off the new European diseases Neanderthals had adapted to, it has a serious downside for us. Our immune system is constantly on high alert, firing at any small perceived threat. This overactive immune system is great at fighting off ancient parasites, but it's too strong for the clean, modern world. It can lead to an increase in chronic inflammatory conditions like allergies, asthma, and even irritable bowel syndrome. The Neanderthal's genetic shield against infection is now causing us to fight ourselves. This is the horror of an immune system that cannot turn off. We've inherited a genetic military that is always ready for a siege, even when the threat is only pollen or dust. We are living with a constant, simmering internal war, simply because the best defense in the Ice Age was an overwhelming, violent genetic reaction. The lupus and Graves' disease risk. Among the Neanderthal immune genes we inherited, some are specifically linked to increased risk for autoimmune diseases like lupus and Graves' disease. These conditions occur when the immune system mistakenly attacks and destroys the body's own tissues. The gene was likely beneficial for Neanderthals by giving them an immediate robust defense against new pathogens they encountered when moving across continents. But that same over-aggressiveness is now directed inward, turning the body's primary defense into its greatest weakness. The genetic shield has become a self-destruct mechanism. This is the ultimate betrayal of the immune system. The DNA of an extinct species is still influencing our body's ability to tell friend from foe. Every case of an autoimmune condition is a reminder that our body's programming is a mixture of two distinct ancient timelines, and sometimes those timelines fight each other with devastating results. The depression link. A specific segment of Neanderthal DNA has been linked to a higher risk of depression and an increased tendency toward loneliness. While scientists are still studying the exact link, it is believed this gene may influence the levels of certain mood-regulating chemicals in the brain. Perhaps, in the harsh, isolated world of our Neanderthal ancestors, a temporary low-energy state was a survival mechanism, a way to conserve precious calories when resources were scarce, or to prevent risky behaviour. Today, however, that low-energy conservation mode can become a chronic, overwhelming state of despair. This is the genetic horror of inherited sadness. We are carrying the ancient genetic burden of a species that faced immense isolation and struggle. The chemical programming that once helped them weather a long, dark winter is now trapping millions in a cycle of mental quietude. Our genetic past is whispering its loneliness into our modern consciousness. The stronger blood clots. Many people inherited Neanderthal genes that make their blood clot faster and more efficiently. For Neanderthals, who frequently faced traumatic injuries from hunting large animals and rough terrain, this was a massive advantage. The ability to stop bleeding quickly often meant the difference between life and death. In modern life, this fast-clotting blood can be a huge liability. It increases the risk of deep vein thrombosis and stroke, where clots form internally and block blood flow to vital organs. The biological defense mechanism against external injury has turned into a dangerous internal threat. This is the genetic horror of too much of a good thing. We are running an emergency survival program designed for a spear wound, even when we are sitting still in a chair. The protective speed of the Neanderthal's blood is now a silent time bomb in our veins, reminding us that we are chemically engineered for a world far more brutal than our own. The ancient flu shield. When early humans moved from Africa into Europe and Asia, they had no natural immunity to the local diseases that Neanderthals had already adapted to. By interbreeding, we acquired some of their protective genes, which helped us fight ancient forms of the flu and other viruses that were common in the Northern Hemisphere. This genetic mix was a life-saving shield, allowing our ancestors to survive new environments. However, the Neanderthal immune system was highly specialized. This meant that while it was excellent at fighting the viruses of their time, it might be less effective against the completely new viral threats that appear today. This is the genetic horror of having an outdated armor. We rely on the defense of an extinct species, and that defense may not recognize a modern enemy. Our ability to survive the seasonal flu is, in part, a testament to a long ago interspecies meeting, a biological receipt for a necessary ancient genetic exchange. The sickle cell curse and shield. Sickle cell anemia is a devastating inherited blood disorder that causes red blood cells to deform into a sickle or crescent shape, blocking blood flow and causing intense pain. It is a terrible genetic disease that has caused immense suffering for millions of people across centuries, especially those with African ancestry. The tragic horror of this gene is that it persists because it offers powerful protection against a far more widespread killer, malaria. A person carrying only one copy of the sickle cell gene is highly resistant to malaria, a mosquito-borne parasite that has killed billions of people throughout history. This is evolution's cruelest bargain. In areas where malaria is rampant, the gene for sickle cell is a genetic shield. But if a child inherits two copies, the shield becomes a fatal weapon. It's a perfect example of a genetic curse being necessary for mass survival, a permanent, painful scar left by the constant ancient threat of plague. The cystic fibrosis trade-off. Cystic fibrosis, CF, is a life-threatening inherited disorder that causes severe damage to the lungs and digestive system by making mucus thick and sticky. It is a single gene defect that continues to affect European populations disproportionately. Just like sickle cell, the CF gene persisted because it offered a crucial unseen defense against historical plagues, possibly typhoid fever or cholera. Carriers of one CF gene may have had a genetic advantage that helped their cells resist the bacteria that caused these deadly diseases, surviving the epidemic while others died. This is the genetic memory of waterborne plague. The survival of one gene that causes a deadly disease today is the historical proof of a defense against a different deadly disease centuries ago. We are all living proof of a genetic coin flip. Survival for the group at the cost of profound suffering for the individual. The Tay-Sachs protection. Tay-Sachs disease is a cruel, fatal genetic disorder that destroys nerve cells in the brain and spinal cord, most commonly leading to death by age 4. It occurs primarily in people of Ashkenazi Jewish heritage, where the disease prevalence is much higher than in the general population. Scientists believe the reason this lethal gene persists is because carrying one copy may have provided protection against tuberculosis, TB. Historically, the crowded, often unsanitary conditions of European ghettos made TB a massive threat, and the partial gene for Tay-Sachs may have helped carriers resist the disease. This is the genetic horror born of overcrowding and persecution. The Tay-Sachs gene is a biological marker of a population's desperate struggle against historical disease, a life-saving defense against one plague that becomes a fatal tragedy in the next generation. It is a permanent, heartbreaking cost of survival in a hostile environment. The hemochromatosis cost. Hereditary. Hemochromatosis is a disorder that causes the body to absorb too much iron from the diet, leading to iron poisoning and organ failure. It is one of the most common genetic disorders among people of Northern European descent. The theory for why this iron-hoarding gene persisted is that it offered a massive advantage during times of famine, when the diet was severely lacking in iron. Those who could absorb every tiny bit of iron would have been stronger and more fertile, surviving when others became weak and anemic. This is the genetic horror of famine memory. The body's inability to stop absorbing iron is a survival program that should have been turned off once food became plentiful. Instead, it runs constantly, turning a life-saving mechanism into a slow, internal poison. We carry the code of a starving ancestor in a world of plenty. The G6PD deficiency, glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase, G6PD deficiency, is a condition that can cause red blood cells to break down after exposure to certain foods, drugs, or infections. It is the most common enzyme deficiency in the world, often found in people from Mediterranean, African, and Asian descent. This deficiency is another genetic response to the constant, pervasive threat of malaria. The cells that lack this enzyme are less hospitable to the malaria parasite, meaning a person with the deficiency is less likely to suffer a fatal malaria infection. The fragility of the blood is a genetic shield against a microscopic killer. This is the horror of the required weakness. The body chose to weaken its red blood cells in one area to protect them from a far greater enemy. It is a trade-off that only makes sense when facing a plague. This deficiency is a permanent silent reminder that the threat of malaria has been one of the greatest shaping forces on the human genetic code. The missing APOE4 shield. The APOE4 gene variant is one of the strongest genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. However, this same gene is thought to have provided a powerful advantage to our ancient ancestors by helping to fight off infections in the gut. In a world full of parasites, bacteria, and poor sanitation, the aggressive inflammatory response triggered by the APOE4 gene was a necessary weapon, keeping the brain safe from constant infections that often travelled from the stomach. But in a clean, modern world, this overactive gene can contribute to the plaque buildup that causes Alzheimer's. This is the genetic horror of clean living. The gene that protected our ancestors from a deadly parasite is now turning against us in old age. The price we pay for escaping constant infection is the increase in the risk of losing our memories. It is a tragic evolutionary flip. The shield of youth becomes the curse of seniority. The leprosy resistance. Leprosy, a disease that attacks the nerves and skin, was once a widespread terror. Scientists have found specific gene variants that grant some people a degree of natural resistance to the disease. These genes control the immune system's initial reaction to the leprosy bacteria. The presence of these resistance genes today is the quiet genetic proof of the scale of the ancient leprosy epidemics. Only those who carried the resistant gene were able to reproduce and pass on their code without suffering the full devastating effects of the disease. This is the genetic horror of mass selection. We carry the remnants of a biological filtering process where a terrifying disease decided which genes survived and which did not. We are the descendants of those who could silently fight off the disease, a biological monument to a plague that shaped the face of humanity. The Black Death legacy. The Black Death, or bubonic plague, killed up to half of Europe's population in the 14th century, one of the greatest mortality events in history. Researchers have recently found gene variants in modern populations that offered high resistance to the plague. These genes likely increase the body's ability to fight off the Yersinia pestis bacteria that caused the plague. Those who possessed these genes were much more likely to survive, meaning these protective variants were rapidly passed down through the generations that followed the plague. This is the genetic horror of the population bottleneck. The genes we carry are the ones selected for survival by the deadliest plague in history. We are walking, living proof that our distant ancestors survived the greatest biological terror imaginable. We carry their shield, the molecular memory of the Black Death. The sleeping herpes code, herpes simplex virus, HSV1, which causes cold sores, often lies dormant in the nerve cells of the face and never truly leaves the body after the initial infection. For many, this is a lifelong inherited coexistence that shows how long this virus has been with humanity. The genetic horror is the constant silent threat of reactivation. When the body is stressed, ill, or exposed to too much sun, the viral code wakes up and travels down the nerve to the skin, causing a painful sore. The code is still there, patiently waiting for the body's defenses to weaken before it strikes again. This is the genetic horror of permanent, unkillable tenants. The ancient virus has found a way to become a silent, permanent part of our neural system. It is a biological pact made in deep time, where the human body agreed to carry the viral code for life, simply to survive the initial acute infection. The chickenpox memory-like herpes, the varicella zoster virus which causes chickenpox, never leaves the body. After the initial childhood infection, the virus retreats and lies dormant in the nerve root ganglia near the spine for decades. It is a silent, unkillable passenger we carry from childhood into old age. The horror is the risk of shingles. Decades later, usually after age 50 or during periods of immense stress, the viral code can reactivate. It travels down the nerve fibre again, causing a painful, localized, blistering rash known as shingles. The illness is simply a resurgence of a childhood disease. This is the genetic horror of a ghost from the past coming back to haunt you. We all carry this viral time bomb, a physical souvenir of a childhood illness that has merely been sleeping. The varicella virus is a biological demonstration that once a code is written into our nerves, it is almost impossible to erase it completely. The p53 guardian failure. The p53 gene is often called the guardian of the genome, because its job is to detect damage to DNA and either repair it or command the damaged cell to self-destruct. It is our body's primary defense against the cellular mutiny we call cancer. The horror is that this crucial guardian gene must be inactivated for up to 50% of all human cancers to form. The cancerous cell must find a way to disable 53, removing the protective sentry and allowing the mutated cell to divide endlessly without consequence. This is the genetic horror of the internal sabotage. Our most important protection against immortality is itself a fragile target. When p53 fails, the cell reverts to a primitive, unchecked state of growth, destroying the careful, organized life of the body. The ultimate goal of life, to divide, becomes the ultimate threat. The telomere shortening clock. At the end of every DNA strand are protective caps called telomeres, which are like the plastic tips on shoelaces. Every time a normal cell divides, these caps get a tiny bit shorter. Once the telomeres become critically short, the cell receives the signal to stop dividing and die. This shortening is the genetic horror of the built-in time clock. It ensures that cells don't live forever, which limits the chance of genetic errors accumulating. However, it is also the mechanism that dictates our own aging and mortality. Our cells are literally counting down to their own destruction, one division at a time. The length of your telomeres is an invisible timer attached to your life. This countdown is not random, but an essential part of the design that prevents runaway growth. It is a biological sacrifice. Individual cells must die on a schedule so that the whole body can remain healthy and organized for a period of time. Cancer's immortality gene. The enzyme that rebuilds the telomere caps and stops them from shortening is called telomerase. Normal body cells only activate telomerase during early development, but once a cell becomes cancerous, it often reactivates this powerful enzyme. This reactivation gives the cancerous cell the ultimate terrifying advantage: genetic immortality. The cells can divide forever without ever aging, bypassing the body's natural clock. The mutated cells essentially find the cheat code for infinite life and use it to destroy the host. This is the horror of the cell that refuses to die. Cancer cells use a biological trick, the reactivation of an ancient gene, to achieve a selfish form of eternal life. It is the genetic rebellion of a single cell that decides its own survival is more important than the survival of the entire body. The mitochondrial sabotage. Mitochondria, the powerhouses of our cells, have their own small loop of DNA, inherited only from the mother. Over time, this mitochondrial DNA accumulates damage much faster than the DNA in the cell nucleus, which contributes significantly to aging. The horror is that as mitochondrial DNA degrades, the cell's energy factory becomes polluted and inefficient. It produces harmful waste products called free radicals, which go on to damage the rest of the cell. The cell's own power supply turns into a source of toxic decay. This is the genetic horror of the deteriorating power source. We inherit a clock that is ticking at two different speeds: the nuclear DNA clock and the faster, dirtier mitochondrial clock. Our inherited energy source is constantly sabotaging the rest of the body in a slow, cumulative process that ends in old age and death. The proto-oncogene threat. Every healthy cell contains genes called proto-oncogenes. These genes are vital for normal growth and division, telling cells when to multiply, for example, when a wound needs to heal. They are the accelerator for cell growth. The horror is the risk of a simple mutation. If a proto-oncogene is damaged, it can become an oncogene, the full-blown gene for cancer. The accelerator pedal gets stuck in the on position, causing cells to divide relentlessly, creating a tumor. The gene meant for healing becomes the gene for disease. This is the genetic horror of the necessary evil. The very genes that allow us to heal from injury and grow in the womb are also the ones that hold the secret to unchecked, immortal growth. The same powerful code that builds the body is always one mistake away from destroying it. The uncontrolled fetal gene. Many types of cancer involve the re-expression of genes that are normally only active in a developing fetus. These genes enable rapid, uncontrolled growth and help the embryo spread quickly throughout the uterine environment. The horror is the cell reverting to its primitive embryonic programming. When an adult cell becomes cancerous, it turns off its mature, organized instructions and starts running the ancient, selfish, and powerful code of a developing embryo. The goal changes from orderly function to rapid parasitic growth. This is the genetic horror of the ghost fetus. The cancerous growth is simply the wrong genetic program running at the wrong time. We carry the code for unconstrained rapid division that is necessary for life, yet that same code is the blueprint for our biological end. It's a tragic confusion of biological identity. The chromosomal chaos. As cells divide and age, the 46 chromosomes inside them can become tangled, broken, or miscounted. This leads to a state known as chromosomal instability, where the cell cannot maintain the integrity of its genetic code. The horror is that this genetic chaos is a trademark of cancer. Cells that are constantly rearranging their DNA are much more likely to create a lethal, mutated version of themselves. This instability allows the cell to rapidly evolve and become resistant to the body's defenses and treatments. This is the genetic horror of the failing factory. The cell's machinery for copying life is breaking down, leading to a cascade of errors. We carry the potential for this chaotic breakdown in every one of our cells, a constant reminder that biological accuracy requires endless energy and is doomed to fail over time. The DNA repair fatigue. Our cells have an incredible constant repair team that patrols the DNA, fixing damage caused by sunlight, toxins, and simple errors in copying. This repair system is vital for preventing mutations and diseases like cancer. The horror is that this repair system is not perfect, and it eventually gets tired. As we age, the repair team becomes less efficient, allowing more errors and damage to accumulate. This slow fatigue is one of the primary drivers of aging and the increased risk of cancer in older people. This is the genetic horror of the slow retreat. The body's primary defense system against genetic chaos is programmed to fail. We're all born with a perfect maintenance crew, but we know they will eventually give up the fight, allowing the inevitable decay to take over. Our cells are designed to be temporary. The cancer stem cell. Within every tumour, there are thought to be a small number of special cells called cancer stem cells. Like normal stem cells, these are incredibly potent and can divide indefinitely to create new cancerous cells. The horror is that these stem cells are highly resistant to chemotherapy and radiation. When treatments kill the bulk of a tumour, the cancer stem cells often survive and can quietly regrow the entire cancer later. They are the immortal, resilient seeds of the tumour that refuse to be fully destroyed. This is the genetic horror of the unkillable seed. The body contains the potential for these powerful, resilient cells that can hijack the tumour's growth. We carry the code for creating these stubborn seeds, a biological ability that can turn a seemingly defeated tumour into a relentless enemy that always returns. The mutated suicide gene normal cells have a necessary program called apoptosis, or programmed cell death, a suicide gene that forces a cell to destroy itself when it is too damaged. This is essential for preventing cancer and for orderly development. The horror is that in almost all cancers, the cell has found a way to disable this suicide gene. The cancer cell ignores the command to die, preferring eternal destructive life. It cuts the wire to the self-destruct mechanism, allowing it to become a permanent toxic member of the body. This is the genetic horror of the cell that refuses its fate. The safety mechanism that should have protected us is broken. We carry the potential for this failure in every cell, a silent single-point failure that allows the fundamental rule of biology, organized life and death, to be completely violated. The thrifty gene's betrayal. The thrifty gene hypothesis suggests that our ancestors evolved genes that made them incredibly efficient at storing fat during times of plenty. This was a massive advantage during unpredictable ice ages and frequent famines, ensuring survival when food was scarce. The horror is that in the modern world, where food is almost always available, this thrifty gene is constantly running. It still tells the body to hoard every calorie, turning a survival advantage into a metabolic time bomb that fuels modern epidemics like type 2 diabetes and obesity. This is the genetic horror of inherited greed. We are biologically programmed for a world of scarcity. The wisdom of our starving ancestors has become a curse for their well-fed descendants, showing that our body's operating system is desperately outdated for the new reality of constant abundance. The constant sugar craving. Our taste buds and brains are genetically engineered to crave sugar with intense priority. This is because, historically, the sweetness of fruit was a signal for a rare, safe source of quick energy and calories, which was essential for survival in the wild. The horror is that this ancient, powerful craving is now exploited by modern food science. We have foods that are engineered to be far sweeter than anything found in nature, constantly triggering this primitive genetic need and leading to overconsumption and health issues. This is the genetic horror of the hijacked instinct. The brain's ancient desire for safe fuel has been turned against us, leading to addiction and disease. We are running a hunter-gatherer's genetic program in a supermarket, a desperate, inherited need that can never truly be satisfied. The hypertension gene. Some people are genetically predisposed to developing hypertension or high blood pressure, where the body struggles to regulate the pressure inside the arteries. This is often linked to genes that control salt retention in the body. The horror is that this salt-hoarding genetic variant was extremely valuable for ancient people living far from the sea, where salt was a precious and rare mineral. Those who could hold on to every bit of salt they consumed were more likely to survive and pass on their salt-hoarding genes. This is the genetic horror of the salt-starved ancestor. The body is running a survival code designed for a life without minerals. Now, in a world of abundant salt, this same code turns on the body, forcing the heart to work harder and increasing the risk of stroke and heart disease. The gut biome inheritance. Your gut contains trillions of microbes that are crucial for digestion and immunity, collectively known as the microbiome. The balance of these microbes is partly inherited from your mother at birth, and it carries the genetic memory of her own environment and diet. The horror is that a lack of diversity in the inherited microbiome, often due to overly sterile modern living or antibiotic use, can lead to chronic gut problems, allergies, and autoimmune issues. The body has lost its robust, ancient inherited defense system. This is the genetic horror of cleanliness. We are programmed for a dirtier, more varied life, and the absence of those ancient microbes weakens our internal defenses. We have inherited a biological ecosystem that is struggling to thrive in the new, sterile environment of the modern world. The lactose intolerance default. The genetic default for all mammals, including humans, is to stop producing the enzyme lactase, which digests milk sugar after weaning. Historically, this was normal, as milk was not a food source after childhood. The body naturally shuts off the milk-drinking gene. The horror is that lactose tolerance, the ability to drink milk as an adult, is a recent rare genetic mutation that only spread through populations that began to domesticate and drink the milk of cattle. For most of the world, lactose intolerance is the genetic norm. This is the genetic horror of the human exception. The majority of humans carry the ancient default code to reject milk, and this default is what causes pain and sickness when milk is consumed. Our bodies are simply running the old original software, a pure reflection of our pre-agricultural past. The high uric acid trap. Some people are genetically predisposed to higher levels of uric acid in their blood, which can lead to the painful condition known as gout. This condition, which causes sharp, crystalline pain in the joints, is linked to genes that evolved to maximize survival. The horror is that high uric acid levels were once believed to have provided a slight survival advantage by helping to maintain blood pressure during times of starvation and acting as an antioxidant. The body kept this gene for survival, but the side effect is joint-destroying pain. This is the genetic horror of crystallized pain. The same mechanism that protected your ancestors from low blood pressure during famine is now creating tiny, destructive crystals in your joints. It is a biological trade-off that is constantly reminding us of the extreme survival pressures that shaped our metabolic systems. The fructose overload. The human liver is genetically programmed to metabolize fructose, the sugar found in fruit, in a way that encourages fat storage. This was excellent for building up winter reserves when fruit was plentiful, preparing the body for a lean period. The horror is that the liver cannot tell the difference between the small, safe dose of fructose in a natural apple and the massive industrial dose found in modern soda and processed foods. The fat-storing switch is constantly flipped on, leading to serious liver damage and obesity. This is the genetic horror of ancient programming being exploited. Your liver is running a starvation protocol in an era of sugary drinks, and the body has no defense against this artificial, overwhelming signal. We are genetically naive to the dangers of concentrated sugar, a flaw that is literally crippling our organs. The low thyroid trait. Many people today suffer from thyroid conditions, where the small gland in the neck either overproduces or underproduces the necessary hormones for metabolism. Genetic variants contribute significantly to this common condition. The horror is that during ancient times, when iodine was scarce due to living far from the sea, a slow, low-level thyroid metabolism could have been an advantage. It would have conserved energy and required less iodine to function, helping people survive in inland environments. This is the genetic horror of inherited exhaustion. The tendency towards a slow metabolism is the shadow of an ancestor trying to conserve resources in a harsh, iodine-deficient landscape. This ancient survival program is now manifesting as chronic fatigue, depression, and weight gain in a world where iodine is easily available. The celiac disease warning. Celiac disease is a severe autoimmune reaction to gluten, a protein found in wheat. This reaction damages the small intestine and causes immense suffering. The risk of developing celiac disease is tightly linked to specific gene variants. The horror is that the genes involved in celiac disease also seem to offer increased protection against certain infectious diseases, especially those common in early farming communities where the disorder first appeared. The genetic mistake was a necessary side effect of adapting to agriculture. This is the genetic horror of the farming life. We carry the code of people who survived the initial wave of new diseases brought on by crowding and new food sources, but the price for that survival is the inability to process the staple of that very new diet. We are biologically conflicted by our own history. The diabetic pregnancy, gestational diabetes, is a form of high blood sugar that develops during pregnancy. It is caused by genetic and hormonal factors that make the mother's body temporarily resistant to insulin, the hormone that regulates sugar. The horror is that this resistance is thought to be an evolutionary strategy to ensure the developing fetus receives as much sugar as possible, boosting its growth in times when food supplies were unpredictable. The mother's body sacrifices its own sugar regulation for the sake of the child. This is the genetic horror of forced sacrifice. The mother's body is running an ancient, ruthless program to prioritize the baby's survival above all else, even if it causes illness. It is a biological relic of deep time scarcity, a reminder that the female body is genetically engineered to prioritize the next generation, whatever the cost. The color blindness trap. The most common form of color blindness is inherited, where the cones in the eye responsible for seeing red and green light do not work correctly. This inability to distinguish between the two colors is a genetic flaw that primarily affects men. The horror is that this genetic defect may have offered an unseen advantage to our ancient ancestors. Studies suggest that colorblind hunter-gatherer men were sometimes better at spotting camouflaged animals or predators, as they focused more on texture and shadow than on color. This is the genetic horror of the necessary flaw. The visual system's mistake became a weapon in the hunt. The inability to see a full spectrum of color is a genetic reminder that evolution does not strive for perfection, only for function. The flawed eye helped the family survive the hunt. The inherited deafness. Hundreds of different genetic mutations can cause inherited deafness. Many of these mutations affect the tiny, delicate structures of the inner ear, preventing sound waves from being properly converted into nerve signals for the brain. The horror is that many of these mutations are passed down silently through generations until two carriers have a child together, at which point the full disabling condition is expressed. It is a silent, inherited time bomb that only activates when the genetic code of two people aligns perfectly. This is the genetic horror of the quiet world. We carry the code for sound, but a single inherited error can turn the world into a silent, isolating place. It is a reminder that the complex biological machinery of the ear is so delicate that a tiny single-point failure in the DNA can cause complete loss of function. The phantom smells. Some people suffer from a condition called phantosmia, where they smell things that are not there, such as the persistent odour of smoke or something rotting. This condition is sometimes caused by genetic changes that make the olfactory system overly sensitive. The horror is that this genetic trait may have been a powerful, life-saving warning system for our ancestors. A heightened sense of smell would have allowed them to detect spoiled food, the smoke of a distant forest fire, or a hidden predator long before others. This is the genetic horror of the constant alarm. The brain's ancient warning system is still running, even though the danger is not present. The inherited gift of enhanced survival has become a constant internal distress signal, filling the world with imaginary but terrifying decay and smoke. The nearsightedness trap, nearsightedness, or myopia, where distant objects appear blurry, is a common condition that is strongly influenced by inherited genes. It is a massive disadvantage in the natural world, making hunting and spotting distant dangers almost impossible. The horror is that this gene has persisted and even spread due to the rapid change in our environment, specifically the need to focus intensely on close-up tasks like reading, writing, and computer screens. The modern world rewards close work, allowing the nearsighted gene to thrive. This is the genetic horror of the desk job. The world we created has made an ancient flaw irrelevant. The genetic code for blurry distance vision, which would have been fatal on the savannah, is now a minor inconvenience easily corrected with glasses. We are adapting to the written word, not the wilderness, the supertaster gene. Some people are born with a genetic variant that makes them supertasters, meaning they have a highly increased sensitivity to bitter flavours. This trait is caused by having more taste buds than the average person. The horror is that this intense sensitivity to bitterness was a powerful defense against accidentally eating poisonous plants, which often contain bitter toxins. The supertaster's aversion to bitter was a life-saving mechanism that ensured they would survive to pass on their cautious genes. This is the genetic horror of the careful eater. Today, this super-cautious gene can lead to an aversion to healthy bitter foods like vegetables, ironically leading to nutritional deficiencies. The life-saving gene of the forest is now causing a small but persistent dietary problem in the modern kitchen. The smell-of-fear humans have special, highly sensitive genes that are perfectly tuned to detect the chemicals produced by fear and stress in other people's sweat. This is an ancient involuntary communication system that warns the group of hidden dangers. The horror is that we are constantly and unconsciously reacting to the fear of others, which can trigger our own anxiety. We are genetically programmed to absorb the stress of the crowd, making us vulnerable to collective panic and unnecessary distress, simply because the brain is still tuned to a survival frequency. This is the genetic horror of the shared panic. The inherited ability to literally smell the fear of your neighbour is a powerful yet intrusive warning system that we cannot turn off. We carry the code of a group animal, forced to share the silent chemical worries of the entire pack, the phantom limb code. People who have lost a limb often experience a painful, intense feeling that the missing limb is still there, a condition known as phantom limb syndrome. This is a cruel neurological trick played by the brain's genetic blueprint. The horror is that the brain has a complete genetic blueprint for the body, and it cannot easily update this map when a limb is gone. The original code for the lost limb persists, causing the brain to send and receive confusing signals from the empty space, resulting in phantom pain. This is the genetic horror of the uneditable map. The blueprint for the body is so deeply ingrained in our nervous system that even physical loss cannot erase the original design. The ghost limb is the physical proof that our brain is running a permanent, unchanging program of what the body should be. The sea diver's reflex. The mammalian diving reflex is a powerful involuntary genetic program that slows the heart rate and redirects blood flow away from the limbs and towards the vital organs when the face is submerged in cold water. The horror is that this reflex is a biological relic of our deep aquatic past, still present and highly active in babies. It is a powerful, ancient survival mechanism that protected our ancestors from drowning, allowing them to remain underwater for longer periods. This is the genetic horror of the body remembering water. We carry the code of an ancient sea creature, a sudden, powerful biological response that turns our body into a temporary aquatic survival machine. It is a startling reminder of how quickly our body can revert to its primitive, deep time programming. The unwanted taste genetic variants can influence how strongly a person perceives the bitter taste of certain compounds found in foods like kale, Brussels sprouts, or tonic water. This is an inherited difference in the taste receptors on the tongue. The horror is that the inability to mask this bitterness can make certain healthy foods repulsive to the person, impacting their diet and long-term health. The genetic difference is so strong that it can fundamentally alter a person's entire relationship with food. This is the genetic horror of the inherited aversion. The sensitivity that once protected a person from poison is now preventing them from eating vegetables. The simple genetic code for a single taste receptor can create a lifelong internal struggle against necessary healthy food. The sibling sickness avoidance. Some studies suggest that humans are genetically programmed to find the scent of strangers more appealing than the scent of close family members, such as siblings. This is an unconscious, inherited mechanism to prevent inbreeding. The horror is that this genetic preference works on an involuntary chemical level, driving us away from close relatives to ensure genetic diversity. The brain has a coded biological disgust for close kinship, which is a powerful yet silent engine of evolutionary survival. This is the genetic horror of the necessary rejection. The body has a built-in alarm system against its own close relatives, overriding emotional connection with a basic chemical signal. We are genetically programmed to seek difference, a subconscious command to mix the code for the health of the species, the useless pseudogenes. Our genome is filled with thousands of pseudogenes, sections of DNA that look like functional genes but have been rendered useless by a mutation, like blueprints for old machines we no longer build. They are the dusty records of ancient abandoned functions. The horror is that these genes are not truly inactive. They can sometimes interfere with the function of their healthy, working counterpart genes, causing disease. A broken, useless code can still disrupt the correct operation of the entire system. This is the genetic horror of the scrap paper. The body's hard drive is filled with old, broken files that can still cause system crashes. We carry the remnants of countless forgotten organisms, and those broken pieces of code are still capable of causing chaos in the modern, sophisticated machine that is the human body. The missing keratin. We carry the pseudogenes for making certain types of keratin, the protein that makes up thick hair, nails, and horns in other animals. These genes have been disabled in humans, a clear marker of our evolution away from a thick protective covering. The horror is that we are genetically programmed for a body covered in dense fur, but that code is now broken. We are left biologically exposed and vulnerable to the cold, forcing us to invent clothing and shelter to survive environments that our ancestors were naturally equipped to handle. This is the genetic horror of the stripped protection. We carry the biological memory of thick, insulating fur, but the code to build it is permanently lost. Our current hairlessness is a genetic sign of vulnerability, a permanent commitment to relying on external tools for warmth and survival. The olfactory graveyard. Around half of the 300 or so genes that code for the human sense of smell are now pseudogenes, or non-functional. They are remnants of a far more powerful ancient nose that once guided our ancestors to food and warned them of predators. The horror is that we have essentially decommissioned half of our nose's warning system. We have exchanged a powerful chemical nose for a sophisticated visual brain. We are now genetically reliant on sight, a sensory change that would have been disastrous for a low-lying nocturnal creature. This is the genetic horror of the half-blind nose. The smell of danger is often lost to us because the body decided it no longer needed that sharp chemical sense. We are constantly unaware of countless important signals simply because the body traded half of its sense of smell for more intelligence. The Y chromosome decay. The Y chromosome, which determines male sex, is shrinking and losing genes at a rapid evolutionary rate. It has already lost about 90% of its original gene content over hundreds of millions of years. The horror is that the Y chromosome has no partner with which to exchange genetic material and repair itself, making it uniquely vulnerable to accumulating damage. Without the ability to correct errors, it is slowly decaying and is predicted to disappear completely in millions of years. This is the genetic horror of the slow disappearance. The chromosome that defines male identity is fundamentally unstable, a ticking time bomb of genetic loss. Every male alive is carrying a piece of code that is slowly, inevitably dissolving into evolutionary obsolescence. The single-task gene. The human body is genetically programmed for a single, primary task: passing on the DNA to the next generation. All other biological functions, including our own survival, are secondary to this ultimate ancient genetic command. The horror is that this command is ruthless. It explains why genes that benefit reproduction, even if they cause deadly disease after reproductive age, like Huntington's or specific cancers, are still passed on and maintained in the population. The genetic code does not care about old age. This is the genetic horror of the species' selfishness. Our body is not designed for individual happiness or long, comfortable life, but purely for the survival of the species. We are biological vehicles for the code, programmed to function until the next generation is secured. The pillow erection muscles. The tiny muscles that cause goosebumps, the erector pili we mentioned earlier, are actually remnants of a more powerful coordinated system that was used to puff up the fur of our ancestors. The horror is that these muscles are now useless, but they still consume energy and are linked to various minor skin disorders. The energy spent on this useless ancient reflex is a small biological tax we pay for running outdated software. This is the genetic horror of the wasted effort. Our body is constantly firing small, meaningless energy pulses to execute a function that has been biologically obsolete for hundreds of thousands of years. It is a persistent ghost in the genetic machine that refuses to be deleted. The broken bile gene. In ancient mammals, there was a genetic ability to store bile in the gallbladder, which helped in digesting fat. While most animals have this, some humans have a gene variant that makes their gallbladder more prone to developing painful, dangerous gallstones. The horror is that this genetic variant is a minor flaw that only persists because it hasn't killed enough people before they reproduce. It is a subtle, yet painful consequence of a minor error in the ancient fat digestion blueprint. This is the genetic horror of the crystallized mistake. The small, digestive organ is a silent time bomb, waiting for the right conditions to become a source of intense, unbearable pain. We carry the code for creating these tiny hard stones in a small, easily obstructed organ. The sleep paralysis. Fear sleep paralysis occurs when the brain wakes up while the body's natural muscle paralysis, which prevents us from acting out our dreams, is still active. The mind is awake, but the body is frozen. The horror is that this paralysis is a necessary genetic safety mechanism that the brain cannot perfectly coordinate. When the brain is caught between the dream world and wakefulness, this ancient genetic mechanism keeps the body safe, even while terrifying the mind. This is the genetic horror of the frozen body. The involuntary safety lock is a terrifying side effect of the brain's need to protect the body from itself. We are genetically programmed to be temporarily locked inside our own bodies as a necessary part of the sleep cycle. The fear of snakes. Humans and other primates share a genetic predisposition to quickly recognize and fear snakes and spiders. Studies show that the brain is naturally wired to respond faster to these shapes than to other threats. The horror is that this fear is an ancient inherited survival instinct that no amount of modern knowledge can fully erase. It is a biological panic button that was coded into our DNA when venomous reptiles were a daily, existential threat to our ancestors. This is the genetic horror of the built-in enemy. We carry the fearful memory of the savannah in our brains. The fear is not taught, it is inherited, a primal automatic reflex that reminds us that our genetic history is filled with the constant deadly threat of venom and ambush. The primitive grasp. Newborn human babies exhibit an incredibly strong involuntary palmar grasp reflex. If you put a finger in their palm, they will cling with surprising strength, a reflex that is so powerful it can almost support their own weight. The horror is that this reflex is a genetic relic of the time when primate infants needed to cling to their mother's fur as she moved. The baby is instinctively running the ancient program for survival in the jungle canopy, trying to avoid falling to the forest floor. This is the genetic horror of the clinging child. The baby's fierce grasp is a desperate, unthinking command from the DNA to hold on for dear life. It is a final, powerful reminder that we are only a few generations removed from a life spent swinging through trees, the Hayflick limit. Most human cells can only divide about 40 to 60 times before they reach the Hayflick limit and permanently stop reproducing. This built-in limit is a genetic failsafe to prevent cells from becoming cancerous. The horror is that this limit is also the biological clock of our mortality. Once a population of cells hits its limit, it cannot be replaced, leading to tissue decay, organ failure, and the general process of aging. We are designed to age as a defense against immortality. This is the genetic horror of the self-imposed limit. Our code prevents us from being immortal to prevent disease, but that same prevention is what ensures our eventual death. We carry the code for our own destruction as a necessary price for not becoming cancerous. The end of menstruation. The human female reproductive system is unique among primates in that it experiences a sharp, definitive end to fertility, menopause, well before the natural end of life. This phenomenon is genetically programmed and affects all women. The horror is that this early end to reproduction may have evolved through a concept called the grandmother hypothesis. Postmenopausal grandmothers help their grandchildren survive, which benefited the overall family's genetics more than having more children themselves. This is the genetic horror of the required pause. The female body is programmed to stop reproducing early, sacrificing individual fertility for the survival of the group. It is a harsh, ancient command written in the genes to shift focus from mother to mentor. The cellular garbage. As we age, our cells accumulate a yellowish-brown pigment called lipofuscin, often called the age pigment. This pigment is a leftover, useless waste product that the cell cannot efficiently dispose of, a kind of internal garbage. The horror is that this accumulating garbage starts to interfere with the cell's normal function, slowing it down and contributing to decay. The cell is literally choking on its own waste, a process that is genetically inevitable as the disposal machinery wears out. This is the genetic horror of the cluttered house, Every cell is slowly filling up with the toxic residue of its own life. We carry the code for this slow internal pollution, a final, slow decay written into the operating manual of the human body. The free radical damage. The process of generating energy in our cells produces highly reactive waste molecules called free radicals. These unstable molecules fly around inside the cell, randomly smashing into and damaging the DNA, proteins, and cell structures. The horror is that this damage is constant and cumulative. While the body has antioxidant defenses to clean up the mess, it can never keep up completely. This constant internal biological warfare is one of the main reasons we age. This is the genetic horror of the internal shrapnel. The simple process of living creates the very weapons that will eventually destroy the body. We are a biological engine that creates its own toxic exhaust, a self-destructive design flaw built into the core of our metabolism. The unseen protein clumps. As we age, certain proteins in the brain can fold incorrectly and clump together to form dangerous plaques and tangles. These toxic clumps are the primary sign of neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. The horror is that the genetic code for these proteins is essential, but the process of folding them is prone to error, especially as the cell's maintenance machinery decays. The building blocks of the brain become the weapons that destroy it. This is the genetic horror of the fatal knot. The beautiful complexity of the protein code can suddenly and catastrophically malfunction. We carry the code for perfect brain structure, but that code also holds the potential for simple, fatal, genetic mistakes to manifest in our final years. The stem cell exhaustion. Stem cells, the body's repair crew, capable of turning into any type of cell to fix damaged tissue. As we age, the ability of these vital stem cells to divide and replenish the body slowly declines. The horror is that this exhaustion is genetically programmed. It is believed that limiting the life of stem cells helps prevent them from becoming cancerous, but the side effect is the body's inability to fully heal or regenerate in old age. This is the genetic horror of the retired repair crew. The body runs out of its own self-repair capability because the gene for unlimited stem cell life has been purposefully deactivated. The price of safety from cancer is the certainty of decay, the men's andropause. While not as sudden as menopause, the male body also experiences a gradual decline in testosterone and fertility with age, often called andropause. This slow, steady decline is genetically programmed to occur after the peak reproductive years. The horror is that the male body is programmed to slowly turn down its vitality once its primary reproductive function has been completed. The drop in hormones leads to loss of muscle mass, energy, and sexual drive. This is the genetic horror of the slow shutdown. The male body is running a biological clock that turns down the key systems once the genetic transfer is secured. It is a slow, methodical winding down, a biological dismissal that reminds us that the code's main purpose has been served. The aging skin genes, specific genes dictate how quickly the body produces collagen and elastin, the two proteins that keep skin firm and elastic. As we age, these genes naturally become less active, leading to wrinkles and sagging skin. The horror is that this genetic slowdown is deliberate. The body prioritizes the function of internal organs over the appearance of the skin, deciding that the maintenance of the exterior is a low-priority task once reproduction is complete. This is the genetic horror of the fading portrait. Our appearance is governed by a genetic calendar that dictates when the skin's structure must begin to collapse. The wrinkles are a physical timeline, a visible reminder of the body's programmed surrender to decay. The bone density cost. As we age, a process called osteoporosis causes bones to lose density and become brittle, especially in women after menopause. This is due to a genetically programmed shift in hormone levels and mineral absorption. The horror is that the strong, solid framework of our youth is genetically destined to become weak and fragile. The body begins to pull calcium from the bones faster than it can replace it, making breaks and fractures more likely. This is the genetic horror of the crumbling pillar. The skeleton is a biological structure that is programmed for self-sabotage in old age. We carry the code for strong bone, but also the code for its inevitable decay, a final weakness built into our physical frame. The chronic inflammation. Aging is often accompanied by a low-grade, constant systemic inflammation throughout the body, sometimes called inflammaging. This is caused by the slow accumulation of damaged cells and inefficient immune responses. The horror is that this constant, simmering internal fire contributes to nearly all diseases of old age, including heart disease, cancer, and diabetes. The body is constantly fighting an enemy that is simply the damage of its own existence. This is the genetic horror of the perpetual burn. We are programmed for a constant, quiet, internal struggle that cannot be won. The body's immune system is simply overwhelmed by the decay of age, leading to a slow internal breakdown that is genetically unavoidable. The Dutch famine legacy. The Dutch famine of 1944-1945 was a period of severe starvation. Children born to mothers who were pregnant during this famine showed genetic changes that were passed down to their own children, a process called epigenetics. The horror is that these changes did not alter the DNA code itself, but rather added chemical tags that altered how the genes were read. These descendants often showed higher rates of obesity and disease because their bodies were permanently programmed for famine survival. This is the genetic horror of the inherited starvation. The stress of a single terrible year created a biological memory that affected generations who never experienced the famine. Your grandparents' hunger is, quite literally, still whispering commands to your cells. The stress hormone changes. Severe, prolonged stress or trauma in a parent can change the epigenetic markers on genes that regulate cortisol, the body's main stress hormone. This change can be passed down to the child. The horror is that the child may inherit an altered stress response, making them more sensitive to stress and anxiety, even if they never experienced the original trauma. The parent's anxiety is genetically imprinted onto the child's stress system. This is the genetic horror of the nervous inheritance. You may be biologically carrying the lingering tension and fear of an ancestor who survived a war or immense pressure. The chemical programming for panic is still running, silently dictated by the memory of their suffering. The toxic exposure legacy. Exposure to certain environmental toxins such as pesticides or heavy metals can trigger epigenetic changes in the exposed individual. These changes, which affect how certain genes are read, can then be passed down through the sperm or egg. The horror is that the damage from an ancient chemical exposure can skip a generation, only to reappear as a disease or vulnerability in the grandchildren. The body is still running a genetic defense against a poison that was only encountered by the grandparents. This is the genetic horror of the generational poison. The chemical pollutants of the past are still writing their destructive code into the bodies of the future. The biological defense against toxins is a slow, silent genetic time bomb that can affect families for centuries. The childhood trauma, echo-adverse childhood experiences such as abuse or neglect, can leave permanent epigenetic marks on the victim's DNA. These marks are chemical signatures that can fundamentally change how the person processes emotion and memory for the rest of their life. The horror is that this change in genetic expression makes the victim's body and mind more vulnerable to depression, addiction, and illness in adulthood. Trauma is not just a psychological event, it is a physical alteration of the genetic instruction manual. This is the genetic horror of the coded scar. The emotional wounds of childhood are physically written onto the DNA, becoming a permanent biological record of suffering. We carry the memory of that pain, which can be passed down silently through the sperm or egg. The loneliness gene. Prolonged. Intense social isolation is not just a feeling, it is a biological stressor that can cause specific genes to turn on or off. Genes related to immune function and inflammation are heavily affected by loneliness. The horror is that the feeling of loneliness can trigger an ancient physiological state of high alert, increasing inflammation in the body. The genetic code is running a survival program that equates social isolation with immediate danger and threat. This is the genetic horror of the body's alarm. Loneliness is a physical command from the DNA to change the body's chemistry. We are biologically programmed to be social, and the absence of that connection forces the body into a damaging, high-stress survival mode. The hunger for stability. Epigenetic studies show that the environment of a parent, particularly the quality of their nutrition and stability, can program a child's metabolism for their future environment. Poor environment equals thrifty, survival metabolism. The horror is that if a mother is malnourished, her body signals to the fetus's DNA to be more efficient at storing fat. If the child is then born into a world of plenty, this survival mechanism becomes a primary risk factor for obesity and diabetes. This is the genetic horror of the wrong programming. The body is running a survival code based on the mother's history, not the child's reality. We are metabolically haunted by the potential scarcity our ancestors faced, even if our life is comfortable. The ancestral smell sensitivity rats exposed to a fear-inducing smell, such as cherry blossom, were found to pass on a genetic increase in sensitivity to that smell to their offspring, even though the offspring were never exposed to the scent. The horror is that this suggests human ancestors may have passed on an increased sensitivity to the smell of certain predators or poisons. You might be genetically programmed to fear the scent of something that killed a great-grandparent. This is the genetic horror of the inherited panic. The brain is running an inherited scent warning system for a danger that no longer exists. We carry the chemical memory of a specific ancient threat, a deep, unreasoning fear triggered by a simple odor. The memory gene, amplification. Specific epigenetic changes in the hippocampus, the part of the brain that controls memory and emotion, have been observed in the children of Holocaust survivors. These changes relate to how genetic information is transcribed. The horror is that the inherited change may affect the children's ability to process and cope with stress, making them emotionally and mentally vulnerable to situations that remind them of their parents' trauma. The body is amplifying the emotional fragility. This is the genetic horror of the historical trauma. We carry the molecular memory of suffering that happened decades ago, making us biologically sensitive to echoes of the past. The terrible events of history are physically written onto the next generation's mental landscape. The fathers age time bomb children, born to older fathers, are known to have an increased risk of certain genetic mutations, including those linked to schizophrenia and autism. This is due to the cumulative errors that occur in sperm-producing cells over a man's lifetime. The horror is that sperm cells are constantly dividing, giving more chances for mutations to occur with age. Unlike the egg cells, which are created before birth, sperm production is a continuous process that acts as a quiet genetic time bomb. This is the genetic horror of the cumulative decay. The biological process of creating new life itself becomes a source of risk. Over time, we carry the potential for these acquired inherited mutations, a quiet reminder that the quality of the genetic code itself can degrade over time, the genetic time warp. The human genome contains vast stretches of non-coding DNA, the so-called junk DNA, which acts like a biological clock. By counting the number of small random mutations that accumulate in these inactive areas, scientists can accurately estimate the age of the species. The horror is that our very cells are recording the passage of deep time. Our genetic code is an active running stopwatch that measures our evolutionary journey. We carry within us a clear, undeniable ledger of how long our lineage has existed on Earth. This is the genetic horror of the unescapable past. Your DNA is a silent history book, constantly logging the truth of your ancestry. We're all walking bundles of accumulated mutations, and those scars of time prove that every living person is an unbroken, incredible chain reaching back to the very dawn of life. If this deep biological history makes you feel both small and infinite, please leave a gentle like to signal that you're listening in the quiet hours, and share what inherited trait you find most fascinating in the comments. We are all, after all, made of stardust and the enduring memories of our ancestors. Sleep deeply now, knowing that even the scariest stories of history have already been written and survived within you. Every scar, every weakness, and every fear is a genetic receipt from a battle that your ancestors won, allowing you to be here tonight. The universe is ancient, but you are here. Good night, and may your dreams be peaceful.